From the so-called Bullseye killer, who hid as many as 4 murders for decades, to a murderer who, likewise, got away with her 11 murders for years, the following are 15 UK killers who don't make headlines anymore, but who, having been deemed too dangerous to ever be released, are well worth knowing about. Aren't they, serial rapist and serial killer Rosemary Pauline West? Together with her husband, Fred West, between 1973 and 1987, Rosemary Pauline West, who was born in November 1953 in Northam, Devon, southwest England, murdered 9 young women. On her own, she took the life of an 8-year-old girl. West had just turned 15 when, at a bus stop one night in early 1968, she met 27-year-old Fred, who I'll be referring to from this point on as Perpetrator F. What the two couldn't possibly have known at that moment was that each was from a highly abusive background. West, for instance, having grown up essaying her younger brothers after being repeatedly raped by her father. For his part, while persistently suffering abuse of some kind from his father, Perpetrator F first had sex at the age of 13 with his own M-O-H-E-R, disguising certain words because of YouTube's decency policies. If I've got you hooked on the video so far, viewer, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready, and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. What the two did rapidly discover in one another was a deep-rooted taste for pornography, prostitution and sadism. When they moved into 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, southwest England, they had since got married and were expecting their second child, their first having come a year after they met. West had, by this point, also murdered 8-year-old Charmaine West, one of her husband's 2 children from his earlier marriage to a woman called Rena Costello. When Perpetrator F, who was banged up at this point for theft, learned what his wife had done, he didn't care. In line with this, in exchange for his wife's murder disclosure to him, Perpetrator F disclosed to his wife his own murder of his children's nanny, 18-year-old Anna McFall from 1967, and that of his very 27-year-old ex-wife from 1971, that's Rena Costello. 1971 was also when West herself murdered Charmaine. Of the 6 further children that West birthed, 3 were fathered by the punters that she slept with in her home-based sex work, who were mainly men that her husband invited over after approaching them in local pubs to F his wife for money. I don't know if West's own father paid his daughter when he came round to thingy her, but I can confirm that Perpetrator F always used to watch his wife being effed by other men through a peephole in the wall. He made videos of his wife's sexual coupling with strangers as well. Perpetrator F had built, all by himself, the torture chamber in the basement of his home where, in 1972, he and his wife imprisoned, tortured and raped their 17-year-old nanny, Caroline Owens. The next 9 victims of the evil couple, however, would suffer a far more devastating ordeal than that of Caroline, who was too traumatised and too scared to testify against the couple after managing to escape them and then file a police report against them. Being suspended from the ceiling of the torture chamber for days on end and being systematically tortured and raped in that time, all in the lead up inevitably to being murdered, is what very sadly befell Linda Goff, Carol Ann Cooper, Lucy Partington, Therese Siegenthaler, Shirley Hubbard, Juanita Mott, Shirley Robinson, Alison Chambers and Heather West. These women, who were all aged between 15 and 21, were mainly kidnapped at bus stops, one such place having ironically been, to remind you, where the evil couple had met, or while out hitchhiking, or while they were the couple's very lodgers. There are 2 theories on what led to the 1994 arrest of the murderous couple. One is that one day in 1992, some of their children approached a police officer as he walked down their street and basically told him that one of the girls was being abused by their father. A second theory is that the police were alerted, again in 1992, by the mother of a girl who was a school friend of Louise West, who was born around 1978, when Louise allegedly told the school friend that she had recently been twice dragged down to the cellar, the torture chamber that is, tied up and raped by her father. Whichever theory is true, it took 2 years for the police to be prompted to get a search warrant, go round to 25 Cromwell Street and start digging the garden up, the home's backyard being the main burial site of the young women who were murdered at the property. This action from the police came in response, ultimately, to the family joke, in inverted commas, that the 5 youngest children had, in the 2-year interim, been telling people, which consisted of their dad's previous repeat threat that they would end up, quote, under the patio, unquote, if they misbehaved. While she had been repeatedly raped by her father from a very young age, Heather West, who was born in 1970, could never just accept it, which led to an occasion at 16 when she fought back particularly hard when her father was about to do it to her again. Hers was one of the many bodies that the police found literally under the patio of the garden of her home, West having stomped her daughter's head until the girl died for not letting her father rape her. The mother's act of murder had come after West and her husband tied their daughter up and raped her. The people that the couple's 5 youngest children had told the under the patio joke to were the foster carers with whom they'd been placed as a result of the allegation of their father's rape of Louise, the court case for that having collapsed when Louise refused to testify. On New Year's Day 1995, perpetrator F hanged himself at Birmingham Prison. West, meanwhile, continues to serve the whole life prison sentence that she got in late 1995, HMP Newhall in West Yorkshire being her current home. As at the time of this recording, the woman was receiving end-of-life care, her end being very much in sight. Levi Bellfield is literally evil by name. Born in 1968, he's a serial killer, a sex offender, a rapist, a kidnapper and a burglar. He's also a woman beater. He had numerous relationships which spawned him, I think, 10 or 11 children, and many of those relationships collapsed because he used to beat the you-know-what out of his girlfriends and wives. He was married to some of them and just living with others just as a boyfriend and girlfriend set up. In 2008, he was convicted of the murders of Marsha McDonnell and Emily de la Grange and of the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy, and he got a whole life order. And then in 2011, he was found guilty of the murder of schoolgirl Milly Dowler, and he again received a whole life order for that murder as well. So he's got 2 whole life orders, and he was in fact the first prisoner in the UK to receive 2 whole life orders.
Did you get a kick out of being involved in these sort of inquiries?
No comment.
Do you think it's a macho type of thing to hear?
No.
Do you think it will help your notoriety?
No comment.
Do you honestly believe that your actions over the 21st and the 22nd of March 2002 are the actions of an innocent man?
No comment.
Then are you an innocent man?
No comment.
Because if you are, tell us.
No comment.
And give us that explanation for where you were and what you were doing.
No comment.
Are you able to do that, Levi?
No comment.
Sarah's told you what she believes you did that particular day, and I wholly support what she says. I believe you took her off the street that day. I believe your motivation was sexual, and I believe you took her back to Collingwood Place, and I believe you killed her there. That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
That's what happened.
No comment.
And then you've used the day of next year to move her body. Is that the truth?
No.
So that's what's happened, isn't it?
No comment.
And then sometime over the following few days, you've driven down to Hampshire, an area that you know, and you've dumped her body.
No comment, sir.
That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
He once, as a child, had SHX with a rabbit, and afterwards he broke the rabbit's neck. His original surname was none other than Rabbit. Rabbetts. He used to sleep with his mother. I don't think they did the thing together, but they used to sleep in the same bed for many, many years. I think well into Levi's teens. And whenever he used to go home and see his mother as an adult, again, he used to sleep in the same bed as her. She wiped his botty bot for him until he was around 12. And he also, before he took to murder, was alleged to have committed a number of essays against young girls when he worked as a nightclub bouncer. But even though the man is as thick as you know what, somehow he was always able to destroy the DNA evidence that he left behind, and so he was never caught. And the police in many cases didn't take the allegations from the girls who came forward about him seriously. A lot of them took drugs and stuff like that, and the police really just didn't care. And so that is the story of Levi Bellfield.
Were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party boy.
Stephen Port, who was born in 1975, is not only a serial killer but also a serial rapist. Between 2014 and 2015, Port murdered 4 young men that he met online. He'd get them to come over to his flat over in Barking in East London, and there he would drug them with GHB, gamma hydroxybutyric acid, quite a well-known date grape drug, and then of course grape them. And all 4 victims died from an overdose of the drug. In the case of one victim, Paul inserted the drug, or rather injected it, directly into the man's you-know-what hole.
So did you have any involvement in the death of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago, Gabriel Cavari, Gabriel Klein?
No, I did not.
At all. Were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party boy.
Might help if I show you a picture. We'll call this CRT 2. This is Jack Taylor. Do you recognise that, mate?
No. No, I just don't recognise him. I don't pay full attention to the guys' faces when I have paid attention to the parties. But I don't recognise his face.
So you don't recognise his face?
I do not know. No.
And I mean that's Jack Taylor. So you don't recognise?
No, I don't.
Jack Taylor.
No.
Paul reported the death of his first victim to police himself, pretending that he'd just found the victim, student Anthony Walgate, slumped outside his block of flats over in Barking, East London. Soon afterwards, though, he admitted that he'd hooked up with Anthony, but claimed that the young man had accidentally overdosed on self-administered GHB. The police didn't challenge this claim of Port, and even though they no less seized the perpetrator's computer, they didn't discover Port's online searches for the date grape drugs that he loved using and graping unconscious boys, searches that the man made just before hooking up with Anthony, because they didn't bother checking the computer. As regards Port's third victim, Daniel Whitworth, performing a forensic analysis of the bedsheet, which belonged of course to Port, that had been left with Daniel's body, would have led the police straight to Port since they had Port's DNA in their database. The police, however, failed to carry out one such forensic analysis. It took Port's 4th murder for the police to start investigating the series of murders, Port's 4th victim, 25-year-old Jack Taylor, having 2 sisters who did some diligent investigating of their own into their brother's murder, and who eventually got the police to actually do their job. Port got his whole life order in 2016. To this day, though, he apparently denies being a murderer. In the early hours of the 7th of August 1985, near the village of Tolly's-Hunt Darcy in Essex, southeast England, Neville and Jean Bamber, both 61, their adopted daughter Sheila Caffell, 28, and Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons Daniel and Nicholas Caffell were all shot dead in their home, White House Farm. The only member of the immediate family to survive the night was the adopted son, Jeremy Bamber, who was then aged 24 and who, luckily for him, had been at his own home in the nearby village of Goldfinger when the mass murder took place. The police were first alerted to a disturbance at White House Farm when, at 3 a.m. on the 7th of August, Jeremy himself called them, claiming to have just received a distressing call from his father, telling him that his sister had gone berserk and that she had a gun.
My father's phoned from White House Farm and he sounded really frightened. He says, my sister's gone crazy and she's got a gun.
Jeremy added that after he himself heard a shot being fired, the line had gone dead. In his call to the police, Jeremy referred to his sister as a nutter. This was a reference to the lady's recent diagnosis of schizophrenia. Initially, the police wrote this devastating set of murders up as murder-suicide. When they went to investigate, you see, they found the body of Sheila Caffell with blood oozing from her throat and with the semi-automatic rifle belonging to Neville, with which all the murders had been perpetrated, lying so as to be pointing towards Sheila's throat. One of Jeremy's cousins, however, whose name is Anne Eaton, discovered 3 days after the killings that the silencer to the murder weapon was in a cupboard in the home instead of being on the rifle, which is where it had always been kept. It seemed very unlikely to Anne and to other members of the family that Sheila would have murdered everyone with the silencer on the rifle and then thoughtfully gone and put the silencer away before shooting herself. They also estimated that keeping the silencer on the rifle would have made the rifle too long for Sheila to reach the trigger in order to shoot herself in the face. It also emerged that Sheila had not one bullet wound to the face, but 2, which, as you can see, makes it even less likely that she shot herself. It's also hard to believe, I'd say, that instead of calling the police or trying to save either his family or himself when his daughter started shooting everyone, Neville Bamber chose to call his son instead. How could he have done any such thing with bullet after bullet flying around his head, for instance? Jeremy Bamber murdered his entire immediate family for the substantial inheritance that he stood to gain after doing so. Straight after the funerals, which took place a few days after the killings, the young man not only went on a windsurfing holiday with his girlfriend, Julie Mugford, but also did lots and lots of partying besides that. That doesn't sound like grief or sadness to me. It was Julie's very report to the police, some weeks later, when she and Jeremy had split up, of Jeremy's year-long plan to do away with his whole family and frame his sister that triggered a renewed police probe into the massacre, which led, in October 1986, to Jeremy's conviction for the killings and to the whole life prison sentence for the perpetrator that came with that. John William Cooper, who was born in 1944, is also known as the Bullseye Killer, and he's a Welsh serial killer. On the 26th of May 2011, he was given a whole life order for the 1985 double murder of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas, and for the 1989 double murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. The murders were known in the media as the Pembrokeshire murders or the coastal murders, because that's where the murders took place, and because of those murders, tourism in that area dropped dramatically. Cooper was also sentenced for the rape of a 16-year-old girl and a sexual assault on a 15-year-old girl, both of those attacks having been carried out while a group of 5 teenagers were held at gunpoint in March 1996 in a wooded area behind the Mount Estate in Cooper's hometown of Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. There was literally nothing nice or good about this man. He actually got his first police records between the ages of 17 and 21, and it was for theft of a vehicle, assaulting a police officer, being drunk and disorderly, and ABH. His marriage came shortly after this point, 1966 being when, decades later, his wife died. Knowing as they then did that her husband was a killer, people feared that Cooper had offed her. The woman's death, however, came from natural causes. Giving his daughter away at her own wedding could well be the only kind thing that Cooper ever did for anyone. His son, who he used to batter and bully, having long since disowned him. Cooper once took aim at his son, literally, with a gun and pulled the trigger, delighting, no doubt, in his son's evident fear, which came from his belief that the gun was loaded, which, thankfully, it wasn't. In 1978, Cooper won all of 90,000 quid, around £500,000 in today's money, and he won that on the pools, while also winning a £4,000 car, an Austin Princess, on a Spot the Ball competition. A few short years after, though, every last penny was gone, Cooper having blown it all on racing bets and having become a heavy drinker during this period as well. As for Cooper's double murder of 1989, his second one to remind you, the police could have nabbed the perpetrator within days of discovering the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. For some reason, however, they swallowed Cooper's story that the wedding ring that he had recently sold was none other than his very own. They don't seem to have asked to see a picture of it or have tried to trace the buyer, for instance, probes which may well have led them to learn that the ring in question was, of course, Mr. Dixon's. Police had seen that it was missing from the murder victim's finger. Cooper was in prison for numerous burglary offences when, in 2006, the police conducted a cold case review of the murder of the Dixons. When police revealed to Cooper that they had found Mr. Dixon's DNA on a pair of Cooper's shorts, ones that he had taken out of Mr. Dixon's rucksack and then kept after killing Mr. Dixon, and also on his shotgun, Cooper tried to frame his son. He said that his lad always used to take his clothes and wear them without his permission. Another piece of evidence against Cooper was an artist's impression of the perpetrator, which proved to be almost a direct match with the way the perpetrator looked when he went on the game show Bullseye, the episode in question having aired only days after Cooper murdered the Dixons. Personally though, I'd say at least 1,000 other men could have been a match for the artist's sketch. Anyway, that's the diabolical story of John William Cooper. Steve Wright, who was born in 1958, is known in the media as the Suffolk Strangler, the man behind the Ipswich serial killings of late 2006. Between the 30th of October and the 10th of December 2006, the bodies of 5 women, who all happened to be sex workers, were discovered at different locations near Ipswich in Suffolk, England. While their bodies were discovered naked, there were no signs of SA. 2 of the victims, Annalie Alderton and Paula Clennell, were confirmed to have been killed by strangling. The cause of death of the other 3 victims, Gemma Adams, Tanya Nicol and Annette Nichols, was never established, the perpetrator himself staying silent on the matter. Similarly, the man has never said why he killed the 5 women. Was it due to resentment of and disgust for women who sell sex, like the case of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper? Who knows? What is known though is that Wright himself was a long-standing user of sex workers. Wright got his whole life order in 2008. Of the 4 murders that Robert Maudsley, who was born in June 1953 in Liverpool, committed between 1974 and 1978, 3 were committed while he was in criminal custody. One of no fewer than 12 children, Maudsley found himself, at the age of 8, being returned to the care of his parents after having been taken away from them, along with some of his siblings, at the age of 21 months due to serious parental neglect. He was returned to the care of social services at 16, however, after suffering years of the most horrific violence and SA from his lorry driver father, who was often put up to his abusive behaviour towards his son by none other than his wife, Maudsley's own mother. Having developed severe psychological trauma, as attested by his numerous attempts at suicide, and having become a substance abuser, at 20, Maudsley was supporting himself down in London by working as a prostitute. He garroted a client of his, John Farrell, over in Wood Green, North London, in March 1974, after the man showed him pictures of his child SA victims. After handing himself into the police, Maudsley was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a psychiatric unit, having been deemed unfit to stand trial. Nothing much came of the man's act from 1976 of holding a fellow patient hostage. That wasn't the case, however, when he murdered another fellow patient by the name of David Francis, who happened to be a child SE offender. Having carried out Francis's torture and murder alongside David Cheeseman, another patient, Maudsley claimed that his reason for ramming a sharpened spoon into his deceased victim's ear with such force that it penetrated through to the man's brain and then splitting the man's head open, exposing his very brain, was to enable him to literally feed on the man's brain. Even though the perpetrator was proven ultimately not to have cannibalised his victim in any way, the media dubbing of Hannibal the Cannibal that this claim of his earned him has stuck with him even up to now. Maudsley was tried for and convicted of Francis's murder, sent to Wakefield's maximum security prison in West Yorkshire, planned on the 29th of July 1978 to murder 7 of his fellow inmates, succeeded in murdering 2, got a whole life prison order, got moved into an underground cage built specifically for him, and in 2000 had his request for a pet budgie denied. When, in April 2025, the man was moved to HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire, he had spent all of 42 years in solitary confinement, with, moreover, the 51 years that he served, as at the time of this recording, he's the UK's longest serving prisoner and apparently has no desire to be released. Well, when you're bound by your sentence to be locked up until you die, that's quite handy, I'd say. For committing 3 murders plus grape, all in a single sitting, Arthur Hutchinson, who was born in Hartlepool, North East England in February 1941, has been locked up since 1983. From 1969 to 1983, Hutchinson was in and out of prison for offences like SE hex with underage girls, firearm possession, and the attempted murder of his half-brother, Dino. On the morning of the 28th of September 1983, after being arrested on suspicion of theft, burglary and grape, Hutchinson arrived at Selby Police Station in North Yorkshire. After tricking police officers into removing his handcuffs so that he could go to the toilet, he made a dastardly escape by jumping through a closed window. Landing on a barbed wire fence, as he did, only added, of course, to the injuries that he sustained from the window's broken glass, the man suffering a particularly nasty injury to one of his 2 knees. On the 22nd of October 1983, Hutchinson sighted, in the garden of a home in Dore, South Yorkshire, a large marquee. This was where 59-year-old Basil Leitner, his 55-year-old wife Avril, their 28-year-old son Richard, and their 18-year-old daughter Nicola had, earlier that day, held the wedding party of the couple's other daughter, Suzanne. After entering the marquee in search of food, Hutchinson broke into Richard's bedroom and stabbed him to death. When the perpetrator was confronted by Richard's father, Basil, at the top of the stairs, he stabbed him as well, the man ending up at the bottom of the stairs after falling backwards. Hutchinson then stabbed Richard's mother, Avril, in the downstairs bedroom before going back upstairs and graping Nicola at knife point, first in her room, then out in the marquee, and then once again back in her room. To get Nicola from her room to the marquee and back again, the perpetrator had walked her past the dead bodies of her mother, father and brother. After being caught on the 5th of November 1983, shockingly, the perpetrator was only sentenced at the conclusion of his trial that was held in September 1984 to 18 years. Thankfully, the Home Secretary of the time, Leon Britton, subsequently upgraded the sentence to a whole life term, and Hutchinson's many appeals against that tariff have all failed.
Looks good.
Thanks, Matt. That makes me feel so good. Real sexy.
This woman has just been arrested on suspicion of 3 murders and 2 attempted murders, and yet she's laughing and flirting with police officers, acting as if she's just been arrested for something like stealing a charger.
Not a t-shirt, it's a tent.
Joanne, signature from you that we've got your property.
Right, so what am I up for? Attempted murder and murder.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder.
Attempted murder and murder, something. So going down for Sunday Rose. Excuse me.
The 3 men that Joanna Dennehy murdered in March 2013 were none other than her friends, her sexual partners to be exact. When she was little, Joanna Dennehy was a very kind, caring, sensitive girl, very close to her sister. She was a very academically gifted pupil who had aspirations of becoming a lawyer, until one day in her teens, for reasons that people just can't explain, she changed. She got into drugs, she got into drink, she got into sex. She ran off with a bloke who was a lot older than her that she came onto, had a couple of babies with him. Then that relationship broke down. She went to prison, came out, got in with some really, really dodgy characters, and then in March 2013 killed 3 people and tried to kill another 2. She said that the reason she did it is because she wanted to see if she was as evil and as cold-hearted as she thought she was, and that after she killed the first person, she had to keep going. It was moreish and she couldn't get enough. She was convicted in 2014 along with the 3 men, her so-called undertakers that had helped her, in particular by getting rid of the bodies. And in fact, Joanna Dennehy's killings were known as the Peterborough ditch murders because they dumped the bodies in a ditch out in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. The 3 accomplices were given finite terms, and I think at least one of them has since been released. Dennehy herself got her whole life order in 2014. While she was on remand before the trial, Dennehy was housed in segregation at HMP Bronzefield, a Category A prison in Surrey, South East England. Prison staff found an escape plot in her diary at this point, which involved killing or seriously injuring a prison officer, cutting off one of the officer's fingers and using the amputated finger to fool the biometric system in the prison. Because of the plot, Dennehy was placed in solitary confinement from September 2013 to September 2015. She claimed that her isolation left her tearful and upset and led her to self-harm. In 2018, the woman requested permission to marry her cellmate, Hayley Palmer, much to the dismay of Palmer's family, who feared that Dennehy might endanger her. In 2018, both Dennehy and Palmer tried to kill themselves in a suicide pact, but failed. In June 2020, Dennehy was reported to be in a relationship with another prisoner, Emma Aitken, a 25-year-old who was serving a 12-year sentence for her part in the murder of a man whose body was dumped outside a social club. In May 2021, it was again reported that Dennehy and Palmer, the latter having since been released from her sentence, which was for robbery, intended to get married. In 2019, Dennehy was moved to Low Newton Prison in County Durham. On her arrival, she allegedly threatened to kill Rosemary West, the UK's only other female whole-life order prisoner besides Joanna Dennehy and Lucy Letby. As a result, West, who, as I record this, is receiving end-of-life care, was moved to another prison. The government, though, denied that Dennehy had threatened to kill the woman. Between 2009 and 2010, Stephen Griffiths, who comes from Bradford in Yorkshire, murdered 3 women: 43-year-old Susan Rushworth, 31-year-old Shirley Armitage, and 36-year-old Suzanne Blamyers. All 3 women happened to be sex workers. Griffiths killed his victims with a crossbow and also claimed to have cannibalised any one or more of them, although that latter claim has never been proven. His act of giving the middle finger to the security cameras in his block of flats was just one piece of evidence that showed that he actually wanted to be caught, and it was all in order to gain notoriety. And yet, in his police interview, he showed no remorse or anything, and a lot of the time he acted very casual, as if murdering 3 people was a light-hearted matter, but when it came to saying why he did what he did, he was somewhat shy and reluctant to go into the details. He said he didn't know, which contradicts his whole demeanour from beforehand. As I say, waving his middle finger at the camera, leaving lots of clues. I think he left a phone or something of his on a train, wanting someone to find it, look through it, and then hand it into the police to help them catch him. That attitude isn't seen when he's asked why he did what he did. Just watch.
What were you setting things on fire for?
Well, to destroy DNA, but like I say, in such a reckless, crazy manner. I can't believe, mind you, I don't know, I think, like I say, caretaker perhaps had other things on his mind, but otherwise I can't believe, you know, with the smoke that must have been billowing out of the windows. Although I did keep them shut for a while as well, so that's why I got a lot of soot all over me, and eventually I got a breathing mask on. But
So, how would you know that the fire destroys DNA?
well, to be perfectly honest, I mean, that was something I always kept meaning to check up on the internet, but it was just an assumption that well, certainly I think the principle I operated on was, well, it certainly isn't going to enhance the quality of the evidence.
Why did you feel the need to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know if I've just potentially killed someone to kill yourself or kill parents. I don't know. That's like deep issues inside me.
He got his whole life order in 2010, and while in prison he has attempted suicide on several occasions, but staff have always caught him in time. And in 2011 he went on a 120-day hunger strike, during which time he avoided contact with other people. But there is such a crazy irony to this guy's story. In 2009 he went to the University of Bradford to write a PhD in homicide studies. On that basis, if you're getting echoes of Brian Kohberger from over in Idaho in the USA and of Nassim Sadi from right here in the UK, you're not the only one. Griffiths has been attacked on a number of occasions in prison. On one occasion in 2024, he was knocked out by somebody who used to be a friend of his third victim, Susan Blamires. And that's the story of Stephen Griffiths. John Duffy is a rapist and murderer whose close friendship with his partner in his evil crimes, David Mulcahy, stemmed from their shared Irish Catholic heritage. Born in 1958 in the Republic of Ireland, Duffy, whose family moved over to England in search of work, instantly hit it off with Mulcahy in the year 1970 at Haverstock School in Camden, North London. At 13, the two once played a game of cricket together at school, using a living hedgehog as a ball. Then one day, when, as young adults, Duffy was working as a carpenter while Mulcahy was working as a plumber, the two were gutted when the woman that they had, out of the blue, decided to burgle and grape, failed to return home on the night in question. The plan of the two men to burgle and grape another woman was again thwarted when the woman came home with a man. One night in October 1982, though, the two did grape a 21-year-old woman after jumping out on her as she walked home and then putting a knife to her throat before forcing her into the garden of an empty house. In the course of 1983, the two men, who, by this point, were both married, committed no fewer than 18 grapes, their victims being pounced on late at night in streets mainly near railway stations in Hampstead, Barnet and other areas around North London. This led to the two men gaining the media dubbing of the railway grapists. The two men continued their grapes through to 1985, committing on one occasion 3 grapes in a single night in the said year, Hendon being where. In December of the said year, the two men strangled 19-year-old Alison Day to death with her own blouse near Hackney Wick, East London. They did that after graping her. In April 1986, they did the same to 15-year-old Marta Tamboza, sorry if I mispronounced that name, in West Horsley in Surrey, southeast England. The following month, they kidnapped 29-year-old Anne Locke after she got off a train at Brookmans Park railway station in Hertfordshire and then raped her before murdering her. Duffy later offered a simple explanation for the two men's escalation to the offence of murder. Grape alone had stopped satisfying them. When, on the 26th of November 1986, Duffy was arrested while following a woman in a secluded park, the perpetrator having taken to committing grape alone on some occasions, you see, his 3 murders, along with some of his grapes, rapidly unravelled. What he kept secret for years, however, even after the 30-year prison term that he got in early 1988 was later upgraded to a whole life order, was the identity of his accomplice. Mulcahy, though, a father of 5, has been locked up since 2001 and isn't expected to get out even when he's done his 30-year minimum term, his former partner in grape and murder having grassed him up, you understand, in 1997. In late August 1988, Anthony Arkwright, who was born in 1967 and comes from Wath-upon-Dean, South Yorkshire, murdered in the space of 56 hours at least 3 innocent individuals, one of which being none other than his own grandfather. One of 5 siblings, all of whom having had their mother walk out on them at an early age, Arkwright was subject, for much of his life, to rumours that his own existence had sprung from an act of sexual intercourse between his mother and her male progenitor. Growing up mostly in care and flunking at school, Arkwright first did 30 months in a Borstal, the old youth custody institution, for burglary and disorder, followed by a 6-month jail term for offences that I couldn't trace. While he was inside, the youth spent his time reading up on serial killers, relating to his fellow inmates that he would one day be as famous as Jack the Ripper. On getting out, Arkwright got a job at a scrap merchant's in Mexborough, South Yorkshire, only to be sacked on the 26th of August 1988 for forever bunking off. The young man responded to this event first by going round to his grandfather's house in Adwick Road, Mexborough, stabbing the man, 68-year-old Stanislav Podojkas, in the neck and then taking hold of a 6-kilogram lamp hammer and crushing the man's skull with it. Assuming that he only murdered his granddad because he thought the man was his dad as well, he killed the man for nothing. His granddad was nothing more to him, relationship-wise, than his granddad. It has never been proven that Arkwright murdered his granddad's 73-year-old housekeeper, Elsa Chronodite, while subsequently stealing the dead man's £3,000 savings. This allegation, however, sits on the perpetrator's criminal file as a matter of record. When, in the early hours of the 28th of August, Arkwright broke into the home of his next-door neighbour, 48-year-old former teacher Raymond Ford, who Arkwright had always hated and always victimised, and stabbed the man up to 540 times before draping his entrails around the room. But for the devil's mask that he had on, he was stark naked. In the morning of the 29th of August, to complete his maniacal murder spree, Arkwright broke into the specially adapted bungalow belonging to his other next-door neighbour, 25-year-old wheelchair user Marcus Law. As payback for all the cigarettes that Law had scrounged off him before that point, Arkwright stabbed the defenceless man at least 70 times before trying to gut him, exactly as he had done to poor Raymond. On failing to rip out the man's insides, Arkwright opted instead to embed one of his victim's crutches into a gaping wound in the man's stomach. Gouging the man's 2 eyes out and then pushing cigarettes into his eye sockets, ears and mouth is what else the psycho did. Having been locked up since 1989, Arkwright is set to die in prison in line with his whole life prison order. On the night of the 21st of June 1971, a steelworker from Cardiff in his mid-20s by the name of Malcolm Green slashed the throat of a 41-year-old woman with a broken bottle. The woman's name was Glenys Johnson, and she happened to be a sex worker that the perpetrator, who murdered this stranger on wasteland near the local docks, had come across. As well as causing a 5-inch wound to Glenys's neck, which nearly decapitated the woman, Green cut several other parts of his victim's body as well, the body subsequently being found half naked and lying face down under a car in a nearby street. In police custody, the perpetrator's confession, which came as soon as the man sat down to be interviewed, but which the man later retracted, said, quote, "I don't know how I done it. All I had was a comb and a shilling. The next thing I knew, I was walking home smothered in blood. I know I did it," unquote. After doing what he did, Green had gone to his workplace, British Steel Corporation's East Moors work, which was nearby, to shower, change, wash his blood-stained clothes, and make a taunting phone call to the police in which he said, quote, "Have you found the body yet? There will be 4 more. This is the Ripper," unquote. That very phone call, though, was then traced to Green's workplace, and the murder itself was then traced to Green, which had to have made the man feel like a total fool. After arresting the perpetrator, police learned that he had told his wife, Marilyn, a few months earlier that he wondered what killing someone would be like. Following that, in their subsequent search of the man's home, police found a dummy made out of a rolled-up carpet, dressed in a shirt and coat, with a knife embedded in its chest and with a red substance staining the area of the stab point. In November 1971, at what was then Cardiff Assize Court, for Glenys's murder, Green got life with a minimum of 25 years. On the 22nd of March 1990, a motorist found, in the 2 holdalls that she had spotted sitting by the A467 near Rogerston in Newport, South Wales, 2 upper arms, 2 legs and a torso. All the body parts were individually wrapped in plastic and sealed with sellotape. 4 days later, a young farmer who came from St Bride's Wedlock, some 15 miles away from Newport, found, wrapped in a plastic bag, a severed and bludgeoned head. Nearby, meanwhile, was a white plastic bag containing 2 amputated hands, with the 3rd finger on the left hand completely crushed. These body parts had come from a 24-year-old New Zealander by the name of Clive Tully, who was last seen alive on the 19th of March in Bristol, southwest England. On that day, Clive, who was broke at this point, had asked a friend of his to put him up for the night. Having agreed to do so and then dropped the man off at his home, Malcolm Green, who'd come out of prison 5 months before, later bludgeoned Clive, his friend, with a hammer and then sawed his body into pieces before bagging it and then scattering it in the bags along rural roads down in South Wales. It's hard to see where, between having been born in 1946, ending up as one of 12, losing one of his brothers to a horrific train accident in 1965, getting married at 21 and working as a crane driver at a steelworks, Green developed his evident bloodlust. Before working as a crane driver, he had worked at a slaughterhouse, as do many other people who don't go on to kill. At the end of his 1991 trial for what was dubbed the body in the bag murder, Green got another 25-year sentence. As at the time of this recording, however, the perpetrator was still locked up because Kenneth Baker, the Home Secretary at the time of the man's sentencing, promptly upgraded the perpetrator's sentence to a whole life term. Wilbert Anthony Dyce got away with the murders of a mother and her 2 children for nearly 3 decades. Dyce was 26 when he raped and stabbed Norma Richards, 27, to death after following her home from a nightclub on the 17th of July 1982. He then stabbed her 9-year-old daughter Samantha to death and drowned 7-year-old Siretta in the bath at their flat at 54 Kingsgate Estate, Dalston, East London. Dyce, whose own mother lived just a few hundred yards away, left the scene after daubing the NF for National Front symbol on the walls in an attempt to make the murder look like a racist murder. The bodies of all 3 victims were found 2 days later on July the 19th by their grandmother Myra and by the stepsister of the 2 girls, Rodine. The murder weapon may have been a 19th century bayonet, which was kept in the flat as an ornament. Nobody suspected Dyce's involvement, his name was never given to the police, and he was never interviewed. It was only during a review in 2009, which was sparked by a query from a journalist researching a book about the footballer Laurie Cunningham, the brother of Norma's partner, that his DNA was matched to semen samples that were found at the scene. Confronted with this damning evidence, Dyce claimed that he had had sex with Norma Richards in the toilet of a nearby club hours before her death. He was convicted, however, of all three murders on the 17th of December 2010 after a trial at the Old Bailey. The court heard that he had also sexually attacked two other women in their own homes and stabbed his ex-wife. At the age of 54, Dyce was jailed for life with a whole life order. In February 1989, together with a friend of his, 17-year-old Paul Glen went to steal 5,000 quid from a local guesthouse owner called Ivor Usher. Believing the money was stashed in the safe, the pair tied Mr. Usher to a chair, but for some reason, Glen suddenly went mad and bludgeoned the man to death with a bar stool and a wrench. Afterwards, in an effort to cover his tracks, he set the place on fire. Glen was jailed for life, but he got out on licence in 2002 after doing 13 years. On getting out, the man followed in the footsteps of John Childs and became a hitman. Having accepted a contract to kill a bloke called Vincent Smart, armed with a kitchen knife, Glen travelled down from Liverpool to Farset in Cambridgeshire, where his target lived. On reaching the man's house, Glen kicked the door down, stormed up to his victim, who was in the middle of making dinner with his girlfriend, and stabbed him repeatedly in the hands, the arms and the chest, one stab going through the man's heart. While Glen was killing his target, the girlfriend of the victim went and hid behind a sofa. She was unharmed. In 2004, given his previous murder conviction, Glen got a whole life order. And by the way, in the contract killing that he carried out, he offed the wrong bloke. Mr. Smart wasn't in, you see, when Glen came calling. His housemate, Robert Bogle, was, and that's who Glen murdered. The murderer seemed not to have even got the basics of contract killing right, including knowing how one's target actually looks, although arguably his contractors held an equal share of the blame for that. Mr. Bogle was black. Glen's intended victim, however, was white. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.